Now that Warzone Season 3 is finally here, it's time for another settings video. As always, this video will be focusing primarily on boosting FPS and lowering latency, but also maintaining good visibility and good overall visual fidelity. If you do find this video useful or informative in any way, then please do leave a like down below. It takes just a second and it helps out the channel massively. Before we jump into it, today's video is sponsored by Blazing Boost. Now, if you are a Warzone or Vanguard player looking to step up their game, then you need to check these guys out. You can select exactly how long you want to hire a coach or a play with pros service down to the hour, so you know exactly how long you're going to be playing for. Really nice and customizable. They've got over 23,000 Trustpilot 5-star reviews, so use my code 4eyes5 at checkout, get a service booked, and step up your game with Blazing Boost. So let's get right into it then. Come into your options, and we're going to start off in the graphics area. That's going to be the focus in today's video, trying to boost that FPS up, of course, but we are also going to go into some of these other sections at the top after we've done the graphics. So once I've covered these, don't rush away. There are some important bits I want to cover after this. So starting off in display mode, I've been having a much better time for the past couple of seasons actually running the game in full screen borderless. Don't ask me why. I've always recommended that you run full screen in pretty much every game because running the game in full screen enables the game to basically take full priority of your system when it's actually maximized on your screen. But with potentially some updates that have happened or how optimized the full screen borderless mode is, I find that this actually leads to a far smoother experience. It also enables you to alt tab out of the game very quickly if you want to quickly check something. Alt tabbing in and out of Warzone does cause some serious issues. You can have FPS drops that you just can't actually come back from until you restart the game. There's like an FPS bug. So in general, I'd recommend you actually go for full screen borderless. You can try full screen out and see, if that works better for you and you're a super competitive player, this might be the best bet, but full screen borderless is working really, really well for me, and I'd recommend you try it out. Display monitor, this is just going to be your monitor that you've got selected. You'll know you're on the right monitor because you'll be able to see the game if you've got multiple monitors, but you can change it from here to other monitors here if you want to. Display adapter, make sure that you've got your GPU set. For most people, there will only be one option. For me, it's my 3070. If you have integrated graphics in your CPU or you have, other forms of graphics that can run on your system, just make sure you've got the right one selected. I'd be surprised if you've got this set wrong, but who knows, you might have never realized that you had to change this. Screen refresh rate, for me, it is locked, and if you've selected full screen borderless, it will be locked, but if you've got full screen, you'll be able to change it. All you need to do is just make sure that this screen refresh rate matches the refresh rate of your monitor. I've got a 240 Hz monitor, so this is 240. A lot of you guys might have 144 or 60 Hz monitors. Just make sure it's set correctly here. Don't be trying to change the setting here. It will not help in any way. Next, render resolution. Just set this to 100. This is just going to be 100% of your resolution, which is selected down here in the advanced drop-down. Because I've got it in full screen borderless, I can't actually change this. But in general, I would recommend that you don't play around with this yet. If, after we go through all the settings, you are having serious FPS problems, you can come in here and turn this 100 down to something like 90, and it will show you what resolution you'll actually end up rendering at. So rendering at 90% of 1920 by 1080 gives me 1728 by 972. And that will blur the game a little bit, but it's not that bad, and it can gain you some nice FPS, but I would definitely recommend doing this last because a lot of the other settings we'll go through will hopefully solve most of your issues. So yeah, leave it at 100. Dynamic resolution, I would recommend you disable this. What this does if you turn it on is it will change the resolution on the fly to maintain a target frame rate. So if you were to set 150 frames per second here, then if I turned on dynamic resolution, if I ever ran into a situation where the FPS would go lower than 150, which is a lot of places in Warzone, it would actually lower the resolution to maintain that FPS. Now, that sounds good in practice, and I think if you're playing on a very high resolution screen, this can be a nice little feature. But for someone running on a 1080p or even a 1440p, lowering that resolution and making the game more blurry is basically never worth it, even for a bit of FPS, so keep it off. Aspect ratio, you should be fine leaving this to automatic, but if you want to be sure, you can set the aspect ratio manually here. For me, it'll be wide 16:9. That's what it will be for most people who are running 1080p or 1440p, that's 16:9. If you're running ultra wide, then it will be one of these two options, the 21:9 or the 32:9. But automatic in all circumstances should work. Sync every frame, VSync, make sure you keep this disabled. This, yes, it does help prevent screen tearing. If you want to run a G-Sync setup, I'm not going to be covering it in this video, but you can run a G-Sync setup where you would turn on V-Sync in some way. I'm not covering it here, so don't worry about it right now. Just turn it off. It makes your latency so much better. Having V-Sync on absolutely screws with your mouse latency. You'll feel like you're doing an input and then the input actually happens on the screen like a couple of milliseconds later. It feels horrible. Keep it disabled. Custom frame rate limit. Put this to unlimited, press advanced, and then actually for me, oh sorry, ignore what I said there. Put this to custom is what I meant to say. This is what I actually should have set. And you want to set your gameplay custom frame rate limit just all the way to the right. If you start having some issues with stuttering in the game, one of the fixes you can do is you can set this to an FPS that you can always hit. So say, you know, your max FPS you can never hit is like 150 FPS, but you sometimes go down to like 130. Well, honestly, just put this at like 130 or 135. That way, most of the time you're running at a stable frame rate. However, most people won't have any issues with FPS going all over the place. And even if it does, it doesn't really affect the gameplay. So I'd recommend you just keep it to all the way maxed out. Menu custom frame rate limit, and this is why I put this to custom. I'd recommend you keep this at something like 100. You do not need the menu running at max FPS. That's just using up system resources for absolutely no reason. It will make your PC feel a bit like slow and horrible. Sometimes you want to sit on the menu, you want to alt tab out, do something on your second monitor. You don't want the menu running at 300 FPS. There's just no point. And the menu will run at really high FPS if you let it, because it's just the menu. It's not having to render in a whole game. Same thing for the out of focus custom frame rate limit. You just really want to make sure that this is set to something like 30 or even lower, so that when you alt tab out, the game just runs little resources, because you don't need to. You've alt tabbed out, you're trying to do something else, so let your PC free up those resources for you. Brightness. I've recommended for the longest time now to run this at around 55 or more. It's defaulted at 50, and a lot of people will use this brightness thing on the right, the not barely and easily visible thing. Just ignore this, try 55 out. In general, I would say take whatever you're running now, add about 5 to it, and you'll probably find that the game actually just pops a bit more, and you're able to spot enemies a lot easier overall. So turning up this brightness, even if it looks a bit weird in the menu, it will make your game look far better. Display gamma, 2.2. That's what you want to run if you're on a monitor, like I am. If you're on a TV, put it to 2.4. Most of you guys will probably be on a monitor though. Nvidia highlights, keep these disabled. These will actually use up some resources, and there's really no point to do this. If you want to record highlights or record your gameplay, you can do this manually using Nvidia Shadowplay or something like OBS, which I'm using to record this video. Don't bother doing the Nvidia highlights thing, because it will just be recording a lot of the time when you don't really want it to, and it's just not necessary. Nvidia Reflex Low Latency. For most people, the kind of band-aid solution here is just put on enabled plus boost. The reason for that is that this does improve your latency overall, and it specifically improves latency in CPU bound cases. What that means is that you're in a situation where your CPU is less strong than your GPU, and Warzone does use both your GPU and your CPU overall. That's going to be the case for most people. Most people have really strong GPUs. I've got a 3070, even if you've got like, I can't even think of a situation where you'd have a CPU that's stronger, but some people might have like sort of workstation style PCs where your CPU is a lot stronger than your GPU overall. In that case, enabled, just the normal option, is actually better. But I would say for most people, band-aid solution, just put this to enable plus boost. That's going to be this typical setup for you. Okay, next up, jumping into quality. Let's fly through these options here, starting with field of view. In general, start off by just shoving this all the way to the right. See if you like playing on 120 FOV, because if you can play on 120 FOV and it doesn't make enemies too small where you can't see them, and it doesn't also actually affect your FPS, because sometimes turning FOV up can affect your FPS. There's more being rendered on your screen, so, you know, turning this down can help. But I'd recommend you start off with 120, because you just get so much more info in the game, and that will help you out in the long run massively, especially in a battle royale where there's stuff going on all around you. If you do experience some problems or want to turn it down, I would recommend you don't go lower than about 105. I think if you start going lower than that, you're really limiting yourself overall. So play around in this range. I know a lot of people play on 110 and they find that a bit better than 120. It's mainly a personal preference thing. Next is the ADS field of view, which you can either set to affected or independent. In general, you want to make sure this is set to affected. What this will do is it will make it so that when you've turned your your base FOV up a lot so you can see a lot more, it will make it so that when you ADS with a 1 times sight or a 2 times sight or something like that, it says anything less than 3.25, it will make it so that the FOV doesn't zoom all the way into the standard ADS. You're not going from like 120 down to like 60 FOV. That can be helpful if you're trying to aim at someone really far away, but in general it limits your FOV way too much. You lose a lot of info when you're ADS'd, and also having this set to affected makes it so that the visual recoil is a lot less, and that has been a trick in the books for quite some time now across multiple CoD games. So affected is definitely your best bet. Camera movement, put this to least. This means that you just get the least camera movements in regards to things happening around you. Overall, it increases your visibility because you've not got your screen shaking as much. Pretty standard. Streaming quality, we put this to low. As it shows on the right, it favors texture performance over quality. I've seen little to no difference in terms of how the textures look, putting this from low to normal, but I have seen some improvements to FPS and just overall how the game runs. So streaming quality, this is what most people recommend to put on low. Texture resolution, this is going to be pretty much down to your VRAM at the bottom. So you can see my VRAM here, I can go up to 8 gigabytes, 8,043 megabytes it says there. About 8 gigs for my GPU. If you've got a lower end GPU and you just want the best performance, you can put this all the way down to very low or low. These look pretty much the same. They have about the same FPS, but low looks a bit better, so I wouldn't usually recommend going all the way to very low. But for most people, you can run normal, and the game looks incredibly better. Visibility is incredibly better. Everything doesn't look just like smudged over in terms of all the textures. Yeah, don't feel like you have to lower this to low. You don't really gain much in terms of FPS by lowering this. You just make the game look a whole lot worse, unless you're running on a really old system, in which case, yeah, turn this down. But for most people, normal. Texture, filter, and isotropic. I would recommend that you actually put this on high from now. I used to put this on low, but this has definitely been optimized a little bit more over time, and anisotropic filtering in general across games is not a heavy option to run. Anisotropic filtering is typically on a 2x to 16x scale, and turning it to 16x or the max option is pretty much always the best bet. It improves how textures look when you look at them at an angle. You can see in the example here, you're looking at this floor at an angle, obviously, because you're looking at it from like down this way. It makes the textures look so much sharper, makes the whole game look better, improves the visibility, and really has little to no effect on performance. So jack this up to high, enjoy yourself. Particle quality, this has been one of the weirdest ones in the game for quite some while. Putting this on high improves FPS, just at a base level. No one seems to know why, but it just does, so put it on high. I haven't even seen any visual difference really in game, you're not going to notice it, but it improves FPS. Who knows why, but yeah, just do it. Bullet impacts and sprays, personal preference, but I'd recommend you enable them because we're playing a shooter. I want to see my bullets hit walls. Hopefully they're not hitting walls, hopefully they're hitting people, but you know what I mean. I think they're just a nice thing to have on, but yeah, personal preference, up to you guys. Tessellation, disable this. It's not really necessary to add this geometry rendering. It's a more of a hefty process. It can really have effects on FPS overall, and it just doesn't really add anything to the game, so turn it off. Dismemberment and gore effects, I actually turn these off because it does help visibility a bit. You know, I don't want human characters getting dismembered when shot by heavy rounds, and gore effects and stuff. That's all stuff that could potentially get in the way. It likely doesn't get in the way, but I have this thought in my head that there's no real reason for me to have it on. I don't need to see loads of blood and stuff. It's more likely to get in the way than actually do any good, so I'd recommend you disable it. On-demand texture streaming, disabled. This can cause serious problems in terms of packet loss and just general performance feeling pretty bad. It also even says over here, texture resolution must be set to high in order to show the high quality textures, which is this option. And we don't want the standard quality either. It starts downloading textures while you're playing. No. That's not something we want to do. Keep that off. Restart shaders installation is a very quick solution to any stuttering problems. If you just start up your Warzone one day and your game feels like ass when it usually feels good, come in here and just press this button. It will redo your shader install, and it will hopefully make the game just run insanely better. It's a really quick and easy trick. Filmic strength, well, I put this to 1. And I'd recommend that most of you do too. Everyone just seems to come in here in settings videos and say put this on 0. It literally says on the right, if the anti-aliasing option is not set to SMAA T2X or Filmic SMAA T2X, then set the Filmic strength to 1 to avoid visual noise issues. It says it right here, and it's true. You need to set this to 1 if you're setting your anti-aliasing to off or to SMAA 1X, which pretty much everyone does. We'll come to the anti-aliasing in just a second, but first of all, film grain definitely to 0. Why you would turn this on, I've got absolutely no idea. Nvidia DLSS, if you are playing on a 1080p monitor, disabled. Never, ever, ever use this. If you're playing on a 1440p monitor, so like a 2K monitor, then as it says on the right, you can actually put this to quality. So this will give you the best quality DLSS, and it can give you some nice FPS improvement. It's worth trying out. It might make things in the game look a bit blurry or a bit janky, but it's definitely worth a try because the FPS boosts can be insane. If you guys don't know what DLS is, it is a super sampling method used by Nvidia cards that enables you to basically downscale the resolution. So we're basically taking like a 2K game and turning it to a 1080p game, and then using the system to basically re-upscale it. So what you end up with is a image that looks like a 2K image, but it has the performance of a 1080p image. It's incredible how it works. I don't think it's implemented perfectly into Warzone just yet, but it's definitely worth a try. So if you're on 2K, try out quality. Anything lower, disabled. Anti-aliasing. This is going to be personal preference. Basically, can you play with jagged lines or not? I tend to prefer playing with slight jagged lines. I don't think they're that bad in Warzone. I think they used to be a lot worse. They've definitely improved. And because of that, I actually turn anti-aliasing off. It makes the whole game look a lot sharper, and it gives nice FPS improvements. If you're having struggles with FPS, 100% you have to have this off, unfortunately. SMAA 1X is used by a lot of people who just cannot stand not having anti-aliasing on. This is probably the most cost-effective option. It does look pretty good. It's better than FXAA, which a lot of games have, which basically just blurs the whole game. I would never recommend going above this to these options. This is where you start getting this temporal anti-aliasing, which does look a bit more blurry. SMAA at least keeps your sharpness, and then for other people, I'd recommend just have it off. So one of these two. Less FPS having this on, but technically better image. Better FPS having it off, but a worse image. Worse. It's sharper. I like sharpness, so I keep it off. Depth of field, disabled. World motion blur, disabled. And weapon motion blur, disabled. 3 options which are terrible. We do not want any of these on. They are not going to help our gameplay in any way. Coming on to the shadows area now. Shadow and lighting. If you want the best FPS, which I know a lot of you are here for, then you can put this on low. But low shadows look absolutely terrible. They look god-awful. Ideally, there'd be an option to just turn off shadows, but maybe that would be too strong, and maybe that would make that would make the game look horrible. Who knows? Low shadows look absolutely terrible. I've actually found going to normal gives you very, very comparable FPS and performance overall, and the shadows look incredibly better, way sharper. I prefer the look of the game like this. A lot of people will. I'd recommend you try this out and see if it affects FPS for you that much. But if you're going for max FPS, yeah, low is what you want to put it on. I'm going to leave it on normal because I like my shadows looking nice. Cache spot shadows and cache sun shadows, turn both of these on. What it does is it makes the game use additional RAM or random access memory to actually store certain shadows in the cache. So when it needs to use those shadows in any future rendered frames, it can pull them from the cache and it improves your performance overall. I'd recommend everyone tries putting this on. If you've got 8 gigabytes or more of RAM, which basically anyone playing Warzone will have. If you don't have that much RAM, then go get some more RAM. It's cheap and you need it in a gaming PC. But if you've got that, then enabled is definitely the option here. Particle lighting, put this to low. It's had pretty little effect on FPS, but it also has pretty little effect on visibility. It's just a bit of a weird option, doesn't really do much. So I'd recommend for settings like that, you just put them on low and forget about them. DirectX ray tracing, definitely disabled. We do not want this on. This is going to eat up performance. Ambient occlusion, disabled. It eats up performance again. It adds this kind of natural soft shadow to a lot of objects. Not necessary for our competitive advantage. It's you know, it's not like when I was talking about these previous shadows where they look terrible or anything. No, you can just turn these off. You won't recognize they're off, and it actually gives pretty considerable improvements to FPS because you're not rendering a ton of little shadows on every single little crevice on the map. A very important setting. And lastly, screen space reflection. I'd recommend you turn these off or disable them. Once again, it improves the quality of reflections. You don't need reflections. There's no advantage to having reflections on in the game. You don't see an enemy in a mirror ever and then go, oh, I know where you are, I can kill you. You just turn these off to improve that performance. Now, before we end, I just want to show you a couple of things in interface that are quite important. First of all, you can come down here to your system area and you can turn on your FPS counter. You should really be doing this when you're trying out any of these settings to really understand, you know, jump in a game and actually go to an area where there are no enemies and just try and see how does the FPS actually feel when you're playing. You can actually see it up here. That's very useful. You can also activate things like server latency and packet loss. These can be really useful if you're having like internet problems to diagnose what the hell is happening. But for me at the moment, I don't really have any problems with those. The only other thing I would recommend is that your minimap shape, you set this to square. You get way more visibility of your minimap. You can see here, you know, I can see all the way down to this right-hand corner, whereas I can't here. I think this is probably set by default, and most people do have this already by now, but you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people who are still running that circle minimap, and it nerfs you. If you ever activate a UAV or anything, you know, you're missing out by not having the square minimap. And the last thing, a little teaser for another video, is the audio mode, which you need to set to midnight mode, and then you need to set your master volume to 75. Why, you might ask? Well, you're going to have to come back to another video where I'm going to show you why midnight mode is the best option for footsteps. But anyway, guys, that is all of the settings for today. Thank you very much for watching. I know it's been a long one, but I like to break down these settings in depth so you guys know exactly why you're setting every setting as I say it. I'm not just saying, I'll do this because you should. No, I'm telling you exactly why. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.